A millionaire CEO thought he had everything, until three identical little boys asked his business partner for spare change, and were kicked out like trash. That moment changed everything. Nathan Rivers was the kind of man people rarely said no to. He was a self-made millionaire, the CEO of a booming real estate empire that spanned both coasts, and his name was whispered in boardrooms and magazine covers alike with a mixture of awe and quiet resentment. He had charm, power, discipline, and a stare that could silence a room. On the surface, he had it all. And yet, anyone who truly knew him, if such a person still existed, would have said the same thing: Nathan Rivers felt nothing. Not anymore. Whatever had once softened him had been buried under years of deals, contracts, losses, and an armor of calculated detachment. He moved through the world like a man with no past and no particular interest in a future beyond his profit margin. That afternoon was like countless others. He was seated at a private table on the shaded terrace of one of his boutique hotels in Miami, sipping a chilled glass of Sauvignon Blanc and discussing an upcoming international development project with his longtime business partner, Garrett Vale. The sky was cloudless, the ocean glittered just beyond the promenade, and expensive perfume drifted past with every passing guest. Nathan leaned back in his chair, clean-shaven and composed, dressed in a pale linen suit tailored to perfection. His dark hair was swept back, not a strand out of place, and behind his sunglasses, his sharp blue eyes watched the world with disinterest. Garrett, meanwhile, was loudly dissecting their next acquisition target, gesturing with one hand and checking his phone with the other. Then, out of nowhere, three small voices interrupted the illusion of serenity. Nathan looked up, slightly annoyed, to see three boys standing in front of their table. They looked around 6 years old, nearly identical, with tousled blonde hair and striking blue eyes that mirrored his own so precisely it made his chest tighten for a moment, though he couldn't explain why. Their clothes were worn and too big, like they had been handed down through too many siblings. One of the boys, the tallest by just an inch or two, stepped forward and said softly, "Excuse me, do you have anything to spare? Our mom is really sick. We just need a little money." Garrett's reaction was instant and brutal. He stood up, pointed sharply down the terrace, and said, "Go on, get out of here. This isn't the place for beggars." The words cut through the afternoon air like a slap. The boys didn't cry. They didn't argue. The taller one simply lowered his eyes and took his brothers by the hand. As they turned to leave, Nathan felt something unexpected unfold inside him. A kind of static, a hum just beneath his ribs. He watched them walk away, their shoulders stiff with the effort of not appearing hurt or embarrassed, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he couldn't stay seated. "Sit down," he told Garrett quietly, without looking at him. Then he stood up, dropped a crisp bill on the table, and followed the boys. He didn't have a plan. He didn't know what he would say. All he knew was that those three small faces had shaken something loose in him that had been locked away for years. Something that didn't care about spreadsheets or quarterly returns or the next luxury development in Dubai. Something that felt an awful lot like conscience. Nathan caught up with the boys just as they were turning a corner off the promenade, their small hands still linked tightly together. They hadn't run, they walked with the kind of quiet dignity that unsettled him more than if they'd burst into tears or bolted into traffic. He slowed his pace as he approached, not wanting to frighten them, suddenly aware of how tall he must seem, how sharply dressed, how far removed he looked from their world. The tallest boy noticed him first and instinctively stepped in front of the other two, his narrow shoulders squared as if to shield them from whatever might come next. "I'm not here to yell," Nathan said, his voice calmer than he felt. "I just want to talk." The boy didn't answer right away. His eyes, almost unnervingly steady for a child so young, studied Nathan as if trying to measure his sincerity. Finally, he gave a small nod. Nathan crouched down to their level, resting his forearms on his knees, and for the first time saw clearly just how thin they were, knees poking through fabric, shoes too tight or too loose, fingernails lined with dirt. But their faces were clean, and their hair, though messy, looked like someone had tried to comb it that morning. These weren't children used to being on the streets. They were children who'd been forced there by something recent, something urgent. "My name is Nathan," he said. "I don't want anything from you. I just want to know if you're okay." The tallest one answered. "I'm Lucas. This is Liam. That's Logan." He didn't mention their last name. He didn't have to. Nathan nodded, careful not to react too strongly to the names, though something about them sank into his chest like a weight. "You said your mom is sick." Lucas gave a short nod. "She hasn't gotten out of bed for 2 days. We tried calling the number on the paper she gave us, but no one picked up. We didn't know what else to do." "Do you have other family?" "No," Lucas said simply. "Just her. And us." Nathan felt a sharp pull in his chest, something that only deepened when Liam stepped slightly closer to his brother, his thumb tucked into his mouth, his eyes wide and searching. Logan looked tired, as if he could fall asleep right there on the sidewalk, but he clung tightly to Liam's shirt like it was the only stable thing in the world. "Are you hungry?" Nathan asked. They didn't answer with words, but the way Liam's eyes flicked toward a cafe across the street told him everything. He stood and gestured toward the corner. "Come with me. Just to eat, that's all." Lucas hesitated. "We're not allowed to go places with strangers." Nathan appreciated that. "You're right. You shouldn't. But this place is just across the street. You can sit by the window the whole time. You don't even have to talk to me if you don't want to." After another long pause, Lucas finally nodded. "Okay." The four of them crossed the street in silence. Inside the cafe, the boys chose the booth furthest from the crowd, closest to the window. Nathan ordered them grilled cheese sandwiches, fruit, and juice, then sat at the far end of the booth, giving them space. They ate slowly at first, as if not quite convinced it was real, but then hunger overtook hesitation. As they ate, Nathan watched them and realized he hadn't felt this alert, this tuned in years. They weren't like other kids. Or maybe they were exactly like other kids, and he had just forgotten. When the food was gone, Lucas leaned back and looked at Nathan carefully. "Why did you come after us?" Nathan didn't lie. "Because something about you felt familiar." Lucas looked unconvinced but didn't press further. "Our mom's name is Emily," he said. "She's really nice. But she's not okay right now." The name hit Nathan like a punch, though he didn't let it show. Emily. It couldn't be the same Emily. Not after all these years. Not here. Not like this. "Do you know your address?" he asked, his voice steady. Lucas nodded and took out a wrinkled slip of paper from his pocket. It had an address written in shaky handwriting. Nathan took it, glanced at it, then looked at them. "I'll take you home," he said. "And if she needs help, we'll get her help. I promise." Lucas stared at him, and for a second, Nathan thought he might say no. But then Logan yawned, leaned against Lucas's side, and the eldest boy simply nodded. In the back of his mind, something had already started to click into place. Too many coincidences. Too many things that felt like fate. He didn't believe in fate. But this wasn't chance. He knew it. He just didn't know yet how much this moment was about to rewrite everything he thought he knew about his life. The building was older than Nathan expected, worn brick, rusted metal railings, and a broken intercom buzzer that hadn't worked in years. He had seen poverty before, of course, but from a distance, in reports, in philanthropic pitches, in areas his company quietly gentrified. This was different. This was real. The boys led him down a narrow set of exterior stairs to a basement apartment that smelled of mildew and damp concrete. The moment they stepped inside, the air changed. It was heavy, close, filled with the quiet desperation of too many long days and longer nights. There was no light on inside, just the muted gray of late afternoon filtering through a single, cracked window. The space was small, one room that served as bedroom, living area, and kitchen all at once. A curtain hung where a door should have been. Folded clothes sat in neat piles on a crate that served as a dresser. There was evidence of care here, of someone trying to hold things together. But it wasn't enough. "Mom?" Lucas called softly. There was no answer. He crossed the room and knelt beside a tattered couch where a woman lay curled beneath a thin blanket. Her skin was pale, her cheeks hollow, her lips dry and cracked. She didn't move. Nathan stepped forward, cautiously, and saw her face for the first time. His breath caught. It was her. Emily James. He hadn't seen her in nearly 7 years, not since that one last night in Los Angeles when they'd argued about everything and nothing, and she'd walked out without another word. He'd assumed she'd moved on with her life, maybe married, maybe left the city for something quieter. He never imagined this. Never imagined her sick and alone in a basement apartment, with 3 children that looked far too much like him for it to be coincidence. "Emily," he said quietly, almost not expecting a response. She stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open for a moment. Her gaze was unfocused, lost in fever. But then it sharpened, just for a second, and found him. Recognition flickered there, faint, confused, but real. "Nathan?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He knelt beside her, unsure of what to do, unsure how to breathe. "I'm here," he said. "You need help." Her lips moved, but the words were slurred. "Boys, are they safe?" "They're fine," he said quickly. "They're with me." She tried to sit up, but her body gave out. Nathan caught her gently, easing her back onto the cushions. She was burning with fever. Her pulse was too fast. He turned to Lucas, who stood a few feet away, arms wrapped tightly around Liam and Logan. "When did this start?" 3 days ago, Lucas answered. "She was dizzy. Then she fell. We thought she'd get better." "She needs a doctor," Nathan said. "Now." He pulled out his phone and called for an ambulance, giving the address and her symptoms with practiced clarity. He didn't think about cost or paperwork. He didn't think about anything except that the woman lying in front of him might die if he didn't act fast enough. While they waited, he moved around the room with quiet purpose. He found a half-empty bottle of medicine by the sink, expired. A torn calendar on the wall marked with "Wick" and "Clinic" in faded pen. There were signs everywhere, of struggle, of survival, of someone doing everything she could with almost nothing. When the paramedics arrived, Nathan stepped back but didn't leave. He stayed as they checked her vitals, loaded her onto the stretcher, and took her away. He promised the boys he'd follow the ambulance, and they trusted him, just like that. It stunned him, how easily they reached for his hands, how naturally they stayed close to him in the hospital waiting room later that night. Hours passed. A doctor finally came out to tell him that Emily was stable, but severely dehydrated and malnourished, with an untreated infection that had nearly gone septic. Another day, and she might not have made it. Nathan thanked the doctor, but the words tasted dry. What he really wanted to do was scream, to rage at himself for not knowing, for not looking, for not being there. But there would be time for that later. That night, back at his penthouse, the 3 boys fell asleep in the guest room, curled up close to each other, still too quiet for children their age. Nathan sat in his living room, the city skyline blinking beyond the glass, and tried to process the truth. Emily had never told him. Never reached out. And yet, the resemblance was undeniable. The timing, the names, the eyes, they were his sons. And he had no idea what to do next. Nathan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's pale face on that worn-out couch, the way her lips barely moved when she asked if the boys were safe. The sterile lights of the hospital, the weight of the doctor's words, the sound of the boys' small feet echoing in his hallway, they repeated in his mind like a film reel he couldn't pause. At dawn, he found himself standing at the edge of the guest room doorway, watching the three boys sleep. Lucas had taken the middle, as if instinctively shielding the other two. Liam clutched a blanket in his fist, and Logan, the smallest, had turned sideways in his sleep and was pressed up against his brother's side. They looked peaceful now, but even in rest, Nathan could sense the strain beneath their stillness. These were children who had learned too early not to ask for too much. Later that morning, he made a call to a private clinic for a DNA test. It felt almost clinical, necessary, yes, but still cold. And yet, it was the only way to confirm what his heart had already begun to suspect. The weight was unbearable. In the meantime, Nathan tried to function. He made them breakfast, or rather attempted to: burnt toast, cold eggs, juice poured too full. The boys didn't complain. They ate with quiet gratitude that twisted something sharp in his gut. They didn't ask to go home. They didn't cry for their mother. Instead, they followed him from room to room with quiet curiosity, asking only small questions: where the bathroom was, if they could watch cartoons, if the beds were always this soft. Over the next few days, Nathan's entire life shrank to the size of their needs. He took emergency calls from investors while Liam tugged at his sleeve and asked what preferred stock meant. He stepped out of meetings to read bedtime stories and answered emails with Logan asleep in his lap. The penthouse transformed: couch cushions became forts, conference tables became puzzle stations, and the silence he had once cherished was replaced with laughter, shouting, and sometimes crying. Nathan was exhausted, but he had never felt more awake. When the DNA results arrived, he sat down alone in his study to open the envelope. He didn't need it anymore. He already knew. But seeing the words on paper, biological father, 99.99% match, hit him with a finality that no intuition could match. His hand trembled slightly as he set the paper down. There it was. Undeniable. The three boys asleep down the hall were his sons. Not maybe. Not possibly. His. He thought he might cry. But instead, a strange calm settled over him, the kind that comes when a storm ends and all that's left is the wreckage, and the chance to rebuild. For a long time, he just sat there, the silence pressing against his thoughts. He thought about Emily, about the way she used to laugh with her whole body, how fiercely she had once believed in him. He thought about how he had thrown it all away for ambition. He hadn't even known she was pregnant. And now, after all those years, she had ended up half-conscious in a basement apartment, and their sons had come to him not because they knew him, but because they had nowhere else to go. Later that evening, as he tucked them into bed, Logan asked, "Are we staying here again?" Nathan nodded, unable to find his voice. Liam yawned and said, "Your house is big. We don't need that many rooms." And then Lucas, quiet as ever, met his gaze and asked, "Are you our dad now?" The question stopped him cold. There were so many ways he could have answered it. But none of them felt right. So he sat on the edge of the bed, rested a hand on Lucas's shoulder, and said simply, "I was always supposed to be." And for the first time, Lucas smiled. The official decision came faster than Nathan anticipated. The hospital social worker, a woman named Dana with tired eyes but a kind voice, scheduled a meeting with him just 5 days after Emily was admitted. She thanked him for stepping in, said the boys had been remarkably calm and well-adjusted considering the circumstances, and then handed him a stack of paperwork. Guardianship. Temporary at first, pending full evaluation. Standard protocol. Still, the words caught in Nathan's throat as he read them. He wasn't being asked to babysit anymore. This was a choice. A responsibility. A line drawn in permanent ink. He signed without hesitation, though his heart pounded the entire time. Once the pen lifted from the paper, everything shifted. There would be no going back to his old life. No quiet weekends. No endless workdays. No polite excuses. From this point forward, 3 little boys, 3 actual human lives, would look to him for stability, protection, love. He wasn't sure he had any of those things to give. But he had already given them everything he had without realizing it, his attention, his time, his heart. That afternoon, he visited Emily in the hospital. She was stronger now, sitting up in bed, her face no longer ghostly. Her voice still carried the scratch of sickness, but it was steadier, more grounded. She looked at him when he walked in, not with surprise, but with resignation and something else too. Relief, maybe. Fear. Gratitude. He couldn't tell. "I thought you might not come back," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the edge of the bed. Nathan sat down, his fingers loosely laced together. "I never should have left in the first place." Emily gave a tired smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "That's not how I remember it. You chose your world. I just stepped out of it." He didn't argue. Because she was right. He had chosen ambition, control, distance. And now the consequences of that choice sat at home playing with Legos in a penthouse that used to echo with silence. "They're amazing," he said instead. "All 3 of them." "They're tough," she replied. "They had to be." There was a long pause, filled only by the soft beeping of the monitors beside her bed. Emily finally looked at him, her eyes bright but tired. "Are you keeping them because you feel guilty? Or because you want them?" He didn't answer right away. The question wasn't cruel. It was honest. She had every right to ask. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and looked her in the eyes. "I didn't even know they existed a week ago," he said. "And now I can't imagine life without them. It's not about guilt. It's about belonging. They're mine. They feel like mine. I want to do this. Even if I'm terrible at it. Even if I screw it all up." Emily's lips trembled, just slightly. She didn't cry. She simply nodded and whispered, "Good. Because I can't. Not yet. I'm not ready to be their mother again." Nathan didn't try to convince her otherwise. He understood. Healing takes more than medicine. It takes space, safety, time. He reached for her hand, held it gently, and for the first time in years, there was no anger between them. Just the weight of all they had lost, and maybe a sliver of what they could still build. When he left the hospital, the boys were waiting for him at home, barefoot in pajamas, half wrapped in a blanket fort built between the couch and the dining room chairs. Liam had fallen asleep inside with a toy dragon tucked under his chin. Logan was drawing on the kitchen tiles with washable markers. Lucas stood guard, protective and serious, as always. When Nathan walked in, Lucas simply asked, "How is she?" "She's better," Nathan said. "She needs time. But she's going to be okay." Lucas didn't smile, but he nodded, and for a moment, that was more than enough. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the chaos had quieted, Nathan stood in the doorway of their room. He watched the 3 of them sleep again, now in matching pajamas someone from the staff had picked out, their faces soft with exhaustion. And he realized something: this was no longer a temporary arrangement. These boys weren't guests. They weren't his duty. They were home. And he would never let them go. Nathan's life transformed in ways he couldn't have predicted. Every day brought new, unexpected challenges. The penthouse, once a shrine to silence and sleek modernism, had become a chaotic, living organism. Toys were scattered across designer rugs. The kitchen counters were lined with cereal boxes, juice cartons, and snack wrappers. The marble floor echoed not with the sound of imported leather shoes but with bare feet and laughter, sometimes followed by tears and shouts of, "He started it." Nathan, who had once negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, now found himself crouched in the hallway trying to mediate a standoff over a broken crayon. Some days, he questioned everything. He questioned if he was good enough, if he had already failed them in ways he couldn't see. He worried about the damage done before he arrived. Nights they went to bed hungry, mornings they woke up alone. But more often than not, those doubts were silenced by small moments. Logan running to him with outstretched arms just because. Liam proudly showing him a drawing of Dad that looked more like a spaghetti monster in a tie. Lucas quietly setting aside the last piece of pizza for one of his brothers. These weren't grand victories, but they were signs. The boys were beginning to trust that this life might last. That this new version of family was real. Work didn't disappear, of course. The board still expected him to lead, investors still needed reassurance, and projects didn't pause just because Nathan Rivers was braiding hair and cleaning glitter off his conference table. He learned to delegate more, hired a chief of operations he trusted, and slowly let go of the idea that his worth depended on being everywhere at once. For the first time, he began to build his schedule around school pickups and bedtime stories, not closing bells and quarterly reports. Not everyone approved. When word began to spread among the upper circles of the business world, that Nathan Rivers, the sharpest mind in real estate, was now raising 3 children, reactions ranged from amusement to doubt. Some called it a midlife crisis. Others whispered about a PR stunt. But the harshest came from within. Garrett Vale, his former business partner, requested a meeting one morning under the guise of discussing a merger. They met in the lobby of Nathan's own hotel, but the tone was far from friendly. Garrett was all confidence and polished arrogance. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This thing you're doing," he said, gesturing vaguely as if fatherhood were an accessory Nathan had picked up, "it's costing you credibility. Investors want leaders, not full-time babysitters. You're turning your life into a nursery." Nathan listened in silence, letting Garrett talk. He watched him the way someone might watch an old ghost, familiar, but no longer frightening. When Garrett finished, waiting for rebuttal or apology, Nathan simply shook his head. "You don't get it," he said quietly. "You've never gotten it. This isn't a detour. It's the first real thing I've ever done." Garrett rolled his eyes. "You're emotional. This will wear off." "No," Nathan said, his voice steady. "This is who I am now. And if that makes some people nervous, they can walk." Later that day, Nathan formally dissolved their partnership. It cost him more than he wanted to admit: contracts, networks, investors. But he didn't hesitate. He had money. What he needed now was integrity. He restructured parts of the company, redirected resources to housing initiatives for single mothers, and hired women like Emily who had lived through circumstances most of his colleagues couldn't imagine. It wasn't about charity. It was about balance. About rebuilding something better with what he had left. That night, Lucas knocked on the study door and asked if Nathan could come see a science volcano they had built in the bathtub. Liam and Logan were already in their pajamas, holding spoons as if they were lab equipment. Nathan smiled, followed them into the bathroom, and knelt on the tile to help with the baking soda. As the foam erupted over the sides of the toy mountain, the boys shouted and laughed, and Nathan felt something crack open inside him, a joy so pure it felt almost undeserved. Later, after the cleanup, after bedtime books and water refills and one more hug, Nathan sat on the edge of his bed and stared out at the city below. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to chase anything. He wasn't running from regret. He wasn't trying to outpace failure. He was simply here. And that, he realized, was more than enough. Emily's recovery was slow and uncertain at first. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but her body had taken a brutal toll from the weeks of neglect and untreated illness. The infection had cleared, but fatigue clung to her like fog, and even simple tasks, brushing her hair, sitting upright for more than 20 minutes, left her winded. Still, each day brought a little more strength. Nathan visited her often, never pushing, never asking more than she was ready to give. He would sit by her bedside, sometimes in silence, sometimes reading aloud updates from the boys, or just letting her watch him without pressure. There were moments when she'd look at him and he'd see the flicker of the woman he used to know, the stubborn spark, the humor she kept buried beneath the exhaustion. But there was caution too. And a deep, aching grief in her eyes that told him she didn't know if she would ever fully return. 3 weeks passed before she finally asked about the boys in more detail. Until then, it had always been surface level: are they eating, are they safe, are they sleeping? But on that day, she looked at him across the hospital room, her face pale but focused, and asked, do they smile when they wake up? The question hit Nathan harder than he expected. He nodded. Sometimes. Logan always does. Lucas pretends he doesn't, but I've seen him peek out from under the blanket with a grin when he thinks no one's looking. And Liam, he talks in his sleep. Says the funniest things. This morning he dreamed he was riding a llama made of jelly beans. Emily laughed softly, and for the first time, it sounded real. It cracked something open between them. They talked for longer that day, more than they had in years. She asked what bedtime was like, what they fought about, what foods they refused. Nathan told her everything, not embellishing, not trying to impress, just being honest. He told her how Lucas guarded the other two like a miniature adult, how Logan sometimes got sad at night but wouldn't say why, and how Liam had started calling Nathan Dad, without ceremony, like it was the most natural word in the world. He told her how scared he was. How much he wanted to get it right. How much he already loved them. Emily listened quietly, then said, "You're doing better than I ever did. I was just surviving." Nathan didn't let her retreat into guilt. "You kept them alive," he said. "You gave them love. That's more than I knew how to do before they walked into my life." Another week passed, and she was discharged from the hospital, not fully healed, but stable, capable of walking and managing basic things on her own. Nathan offered to bring her home, but she declined. Not yet. She needed space. She needed to feel strong before facing them again. Instead, she moved into a small, temporary apartment nearby, paid for without fanfare by Nathan, and began physical therapy and counseling. She insisted on doing as much of it alone as she could. He didn't fight her on it. He understood. Strength, for Emily, had never meant loud declarations. It meant getting up again. Quietly. With purpose. Then came the day she was ready. It was early spring, the air warm and full of birdsong. The boys were playing in the schoolyard after class, under the supervision of one of Nathan's staff, while he stood nearby watching from a bench, sipping lukewarm coffee. He hadn't told them she was coming. Emily had asked for that, no expectations, no drama, just a moment of truth. She walked into the playground slowly, unsure of how her legs would carry her, unsure what they'd say, unsure if they'd even recognize her after everything. They did. Lucas spotted her first, froze, and then said nothing. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just looked. Liam turned next and blinked as if unsure whether it was a dream. Logan gasped and dropped the toy car he was holding. And then, slowly, as if pulled by some invisible thread, the three of them walked to her. No words. Just three small bodies pressing into her at once, arms wrapping around her waist and shoulders and face, and Emily crumbling in the middle of them, tears streaming down her cheeks. They clung to her as if afraid she'd vanish again. Nathan stood back, watching the scene unfold with something tight and painful in his chest. But not painful in a bad way. It was the kind of ache that came with hope, with healing. With knowing something had been broken, but now, slowly, against all odds, was mending. When Emily finally looked up, her eyes found Nathan's. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Everything she felt was there in her expression. Gratitude. Regret. Relief. And a quiet, cautious belief that maybe this story wasn't over. Maybe it had just begun. A full year had passed since the day Nathan found the boys on that hotel terrace, and in that time, his world had reshaped itself entirely. What once had been a life defined by sharp suits, rigid routines, and boardroom victories had softened into something far messier, infinitely more chaotic, and deeply human. His penthouse no longer resembled the pristine, impersonal space it used to be. It had been taken over by the vibrant evidence of childhood, walls taped with drawings, shelves overflowing with books about dinosaurs and space, a never-ending trail of mismatched socks, and the occasional sticky handprint on a window he no longer rushed to clean. He had learned things in the last 12 months he'd never thought he'd care to know: how to braid hair for Spirit Week, because Liam liked his fancy pirate look, the exact temperature to warm chicken nuggets so Logan wouldn't complain, and the names of all 3 teachers at the boys' school. He knew the routes to and from soccer practice, how to fake excitement during puppet shows, and the correct way to fold a blanket according to Lucas's very specific system. And somewhere along the way, without any announcement or moment of clarity, he had become a father, not just in title, but in presence, in instinct, in love. Emily had stayed close, slowly rebuilding her life with the same quiet determination she had used to hold it together all those years. She didn't move in with them, not yet, but she came over for dinners, joined weekend trips to the park, and sat next to Nathan at school plays. They had learned how to coexist again, not as the people they used to be, but as something new, co-parents, yes, but also something softer. There were no grand gestures or promises. Only consistency. Honesty. Forgiveness in the form of patience. On one sunny afternoon, as spring settled into full bloom, Nathan found himself sitting beside Emily on a bench in the park. The boys were running in chaotic circles around a flock of confused pigeons, their laughter carrying over the breeze like music. Emily leaned back against the bench, her face turned toward the sun, her eyes closed. Nathan watched her for a moment, then turned his gaze toward the boys. "They're different now," she said, without opening her eyes. "Happier. Lighter." "They are," he agreed. "So am I." She looked at him then, her eyes clear and steady. "You did this, Nathan. You gave them something I couldn't anymore." He shook his head slowly. "You brought them into the world. You kept them alive. You did more than I ever did." "I gave them love," she said. "But you gave them peace. And safety. And their dad." He was quiet after that, unsure how to respond. So much still felt fragile between them, but it was no longer painful. It was just real. Earned. Then, after a long pause, he looked at her and said, "Thank you. For finding your way to me, even if it took everything you had." She smiled faintly. "You should be thanking them. They brought you back to life." And in that moment, he realized she was right. The boys hadn't just shown up at his hotel that day. They had pulled him out of a life that looked successful on the surface but had been hollow underneath. They had taught him that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfection. It was about showing up, day after day, with your whole heart, even when you were scared, even when you didn't have all the answers. As the sun began to set and the boys finally tired themselves out, Logan climbed onto Nathan's lap, curling into his chest with the trust of a child who had finally stopped wondering whether someone would catch him. Liam leaned against Emily's side, humming a nonsense song, while Lucas remained a step behind, always watching, always guarding, but no longer wary. Nathan wrapped his arms around Logan and looked out over the grass, where the last light of the day shimmered across the trees. He felt full. Not with power. Not with success. But with something far rarer. Wholeness. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing anything. He wasn't proving anything. He was exactly where he needed to be. And as the boys started arguing about what movie to watch that night, Nathan just smiled, stood, and said, "Let's go home." Because now, home wasn't a place. It was them.